Welcome, everyone, on behalf of WeCare 365, and a big thanks to our panelists, Anna Faringa, Nick Stevens, and Keith Govius, and they'll be introducing themselves soon. When we first started floating this idea about talking about, growing legal and financial risk, it really hit a chord, and we fully filled up our 100 licenses with Zoom, and lots of people want the recording. So you should be aware that we will be recording it and sending details as a follow-up. I'll just share my slides so that we can get underway. And we'll let you know what we're going to be covering during this period. Everyone see that okay? All good?
All good.
Great. This year has been incredibly trying in terms of disruption, change, AI, just constant change. And one of the things that's really important is, what we do about it. We're going to be talking about burnout prevention conversations. So what we're going to be talking about is, first of all, we're going to have our panel introduce themselves and talk about, where they're coming from, what's important, how they really became involved in the subject and the part they're really, interested in. And we'll then be talking about a case study. And the case study is a very recent one. It's the COBAR management one, and we shared a little bit about it in our emails and LinkedIn posts. So that's create a lot of interest. So in terms of what we're going to be covering today, as I mentioned, we're going to be covering some background and some context for this. We're also going to be covering this case study, and then there's a Q&A to come. And we've got lots of questions already asked when people register, which is fantastic. But just request that if you have ones that go through, please put it into the chat. And Jenny behind the scenes will be monitoring that. And if we do have time, we'll get to that as well. Hopefully that's the last one. I'm going to share the screen again. So a little bit about me. I'm a team resilience author and speaker. I'm also a founding board director of Are You OK? And host of the Caring CEO podcast, where I've now interviewed 75 CEOs that champion a culture of care and a culture of high performance. And the reason that the WeCare 365 team decided to do this was to show that this is in theory. There are incredible managers that manage to achieve both, care and connection and belonging, as well as great performance. I'm also the co-founder of WeCare 365, and we'll be talking a little bit later on about what we do. Essentially, we put together simple and customized training programs to help managers have better mental health discussions. And Anna, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Of course. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. So my name's Anna Faringa, as you can clearly see on the screen. I've been working in this space of mental health and mental ill health for about 20 years with an extensive injury management, disability management, and organisational psychology background. So again, way before the regulatory landscape adjusted, I've been knee-deep in looking at why these injuries occur and so forth. The author part is related to a bunch of white papers, specifically that I've written for the oil, gas and mining industries. And obviously I do speak, before COVID, quite internationally, but I suppose with Australia being one of the #1 countries ramping up in this space, definitely busy enough within these borders at this time. And I work all over Australia in a general consulting capacity, primarily focusing on workforce planning and education.
Thanks, Anna. And Keith?
Thanks, Graham, and hello, everyone. So as Graham's pointed out, my name is Keith Govius. I have had nearly 15 years worth of experience on the employer side, running national and multinational workers' comp safety and injury management programs. For 5 years, I led a risk advisory consultancy team for a large insurance broker here in Australia, and I'm now a health and safety manager with EML, a workers' comp scheme agent in Victoria, New South Wales, and SA. Graham, probably my interest and expertise plays out. I've spent a little bit of time representing employers to regulatory panels on designing both policy and intervention guidelines for mental health, especially for young workers, but now probably more importantly for workforces in general. And I definitely take the view that I am probably also one of those people with lived experience that's had my own difficulties over time. So I really want to make sure that I can contribute back with a lived experience voice.
Fantastic. And Nick?
Yes, thanks. First of all, thanks, Graham, and thanks to the WeCare 365 team for allowing me as part of the panel today. As you know, I'm Nick Stevens, so I founded Stevens and Associates, which are employment law and workplace lawyers 20 years ago, actually over 20 years ago. I've been in this space for over 30 years. I'm an employment lawyer by trade. That's all I've specialised in here in New South Wales, but obviously have a federal practice as well. I represent mainly an employer base, but I do some work for individuals. As I say, I only represent the good guys, so always good to do that. But I'm thrilled to be on the panel today and happy to answer any questions that sort of obviously of a legal type nature.
Fantastic, Nick. Thank you. And just as Keith talked about his lived experience, I also had my own lived experience and was a deep motivator about how I got involved with this. I wrote a series of books. Through those books, I met Gavin Larkin, the founder of Are You OK, and helped to launch the very first one, and served on the board for 13 years. And it's been great to see that grow. And I think there's some lessons in Are You OK which are relevant for the psychosocial risk area. So this is what we're covering today. As I mentioned before, we're going to be talking about a case study, a little bit of background first. You've heard from the attendees. Then we're going to have a Q&A, and thank you very much. There was a lot of questions put when people register, which is fantastic. But if something comes up, please just put it into the chat, and Jenny will be monitoring it behind the scenes. Our plan is to finish at 1:40. And, that will certainly be our intention. This is I guess, something that really brought how important managers are in solving the mental health issues. And about 2 years ago, I put this post on LinkedIn. And as you can see there's 46,000 likes and over 4,000 shares. And it actually had 2.8 million views, by far the biggest that I've ever had. And I had a link to it which shared evidence that supported this up. So, and it's not just this, of course. If you look at the Gallup book called It's the Manager, they say that a manager contributes 70% towards the well-being and engagement of the team. So the next thing to consider, I guess, was a second post that I put up a little bit earlier. And as you can see, I really put there that boards and executive teams are financially and legally responsible to provide a healthy environment, a mentally healthy environment. But when I asked, do managers know practical things they can do each day? 81% or 8 out of 10 managers don't know what to do. So I want to just do a quick comment from the panel on why they think that we're in this situation where something is actually critical at the boardroom, but isn't happening or not clearly happening, in teams, and how managers do that. So Keith, if you would mind start, and then Nick and Anna just comment on that, that would be fantastic.
I think, in my experience, Graham, both as a frontline manager and then supporting managers in operational context, one thing that comes through is the amount of pace and the amount of focus most managers have on operational KPIs and operational technical skills. So quite often, managers, I think, are promoted into their roles because they're operationally very good at what they do, and we don't give adequate time and attention to their people skills, allowing them to learn how to ask and to be inquisitive. I think something else that managers sometimes need to have as a practical skill is a concept of knowing that someone has a safe space to say they don't understand how to complete a task, or they don't understand what they're being asked to do. Because of that pace that I referred to earlier on, most managers are hoping that if I say it and say it once, you just go away and do it, because I don't have time to deal with that right now. But unfortunately for us, it's usually the aftermath of people that have either not done that work properly or have not done it at all and have that anxiety building up because they haven't done it, that tends to take down more of managers' time. So I guess that's my view.
Thanks, Nick. Sorry, thanks, Keith. That's fantastic. Nick?
Yeah, look, I concur with what Keith has said. I think one of the key things is managers are required these days to do so many different things, and so if they're looking at things like sort of they're easily accountable, like KPIs, etc. What's a minimum requirement? Are they turning up? Are we getting through all the work? It's also hard at the same time to then look at things you can't see, and that's one of the biggest problems with obviously psychosocial issues is, it's not like a physical injury, you can't see it. And so there are some warning signs, but they have to not only look at the warning signs, but also try and keep an eye on how each employee is performing. And often the other one is just a ratio. There's one manager to looking after so many different people in different states, in different jobs. Pretty hard for that manager to sort of almost spin so many different plates on different sticks at one time to try and keep things going. That's sort of my experience. So I could imagine it'd be a bit overwhelming for managers to know what to do.
Anything to add, Anna?
Absolutely. Thanks, Graham. I'm going to draw it right back to the drawing board, and that is so many managers and boards and executives out there just don't know these things are around. I know that a lot of people that are joining us today are from safety and human resource backgrounds, and you may have felt like, gosh, how can they not know? But the actual launch of the amended regulations way back in 2022 was really done appallingly. Unless you had subscribed to some sort of safety industry via email, there was no media release, there was nothing on telly. People are just finding this out either through regulatory intervention or through word of mouth. So first things first, managers aren't going to manage what they don't know they need to manage. And secondly, we can't just assume because someone's in a managerial role that they would know what to do. We're all learning what risk is or what psychosocial risk is. And there's a particular way in which we need to address those risks. So firstly, not knowing they're around and not having the education within the organisation to give managers capability, and a very important word, permission, to be able to intervene early, rather than sticking back to the old style of working where, okay, there's a problem with a person, we'll flick them off to human resources because human resources resource humans. So there's a big capability gap there, and there's a big, just a general knowledge gap there as well.
I'd like to really pick up on that, Anna. I presented to a group of HR managers and work health safety people yesterday in a city in Sydney, and we discussed this, and they mentioned quite a few things that you've already mentioned. They also said this fear about saying the wrong thing. There's also we don't want to cross the boundary between personal and work life. So there's lots of hesitancy, and there's probably something even more significant, and that is the burnout of managers. Managers are even more burnt out than employees, and so that has to be an issue. The other thing that I think is also important is this word. Psychosocial risk sounds complicated. Now, we work in it every day in HR and work health safety and speaking, but people are confused by it. They don't know if it's related to psychological safety or mental health or whatever. So I think there's a real need to simplify this. And a good way to think of it is that it's harmful work stress. That's what it is. And, I think most people understand that perspective. Of course, there's nuances, but if you think that way, people just seem to get it, which I think is a really great progression there. I'll just now share and the message, I guess, from Are You OK? This was, I helped to launch it in Parliament House in Canberra in 2009. And this is 2019, launching it on the Navy, just one of the Australian iconic brands. And I'm absolutely convinced that it's the simplicity of the message that has really helped it to grow. Not just the branding, but also the tag that a conversation could change a life. And I think there's a lot of lessons in terms of how we position things to managers, but also to employees. So this is a case which I'll just give you a minute to read through. There's a pretty clear message there, and the message is about the importance of being proactive. And one of the things that I've noticed is, I've spoken a number of safety days, and in places like construction and railways, it's incredible sophistication. They know the major risk for the last 5 years, they can track it. And then I brought on to really explain what psychosocial risk is. And this is to a safety audience. So Nick, be interested in your comment on this, and from, I guess, a legal perspective, is this significant that people should be concerned about?
Yeah, thanks, Graham. Well, look, I think it is. I think it's something that's been growing for some time. Don't be overly concerned with the large payout, even though that's probably the first thing that it sort of is striking. It is quite unique to these circumstances, and why I say that is the circumstances are an undertaking that's been given, so it's not a tribunal awarding, but it is obviously inherent that they did that in order to avoid having to go through what is really criminal proceedings that have been commenced. And it is important to note that it has been brought by a specific tribunal that most of the attendees, I haven't had a chance to look at the whole list, may not be subject to. That's the New South Wales Resources Regulator, as opposed to the Work Health and Safety regulations and the Safe Work Australia. And so I suppose the key takeaway, though, is that if you don't do something about it, then you could be subject to work health and safety issues and prosecution in this case. And that's why such a large undertaking was required, rather than face the gauntlet of having actual penalty imposed and criminal proceedings, a verdict against the actual Cobar management. But it is important to note these two people weren't, as you'd expect, maybe working in the mines. They're actually accountants, and they were working unusual hours because the head office was in Switzerland. So obviously the tyranny of distance and the timing. But no longer can you just turn a blind eye to these things and say they're working the hours and doing the job, and I'm paying them a good salary, so they should expect to just do the work. But hopefully that gives a bit of a background summary of some of my comments anyway.
Your comment, Anna?
Yeah, Graham, look, this is an interesting one. And to Nick's point, it is based on the actual event. The fact that this wasn't an award and it was an undertaking will vary from case to case. But look, in simplistic terms, firstly, did the Cobar mine actually know that they were meant to be doing this? That's my question. Did they know? And that's why I drove that message home earlier. A lot of people we assume should know, don't. And that does not place it into a position of priority. Secondly, this is a complete work design issue. Okay, so this isn't about supporting these accountants to access EAP, which I presume, having working heavily with managers and boards across Australia, they probably would have just referred them to there. Whereas it wasn't actually, it was the work, it was that work stress that was harming them. So to your point, Nick, the way it's always been done is not going to fly anymore. So it doesn't matter what your position is, what your pay packet is. No one's immune to work stress. And the fact that they had raised the issue and it was dismissed means that these people did not act reasonably, and that's why it got the steam that it did, and they were referred to obviously the resources regulator. But I've got a little bit of a bleeding heart now, obviously to save lives, but also for employers based on their level of knowledge and what they're supposed to do. If they don't even know this factor is around, then how are they going to be proactive in it? So I think we're going to see a lot more cases like this. And there are more cases like this that happened to Cairns City Council. It happened to the Victorian Building Authority. It happened to the Victorian Coroner's Court. And sorry for the trigger warning, but two of those cases involved people taking their lives and the workplace being held liable. So it's not just about making sure people are okay. It's about making sure what's harming them is redesigned in a better way to reduce harm moving forward. So, it states in the case, reactive compliance will not remove the breach.
Keith, your thoughts?
I think maybe Anna, for me, summed it up really, really well in the fact, Graham, that we're seeing regulators across Australia all now moving away from an education philosophy into enforcement. And I think that there is a real perception that workplaces need to have identified psychosocial hazards and risk in the workplace and have risk control processes in play. So more conversations like the one we're having now to really help unpack that and to help communicate the processes for managers will be helpful. But this is consistent with what we're seeing not only in Australia, but globally.
And I think the other element is that, this did just really start with two employees, two accountants who were really, really stressed. And when the regulator went in, they found that they had very poor role clarity. They were overworked because they had a Zurich head office. They had to do crazy time zone meetings, in Australia, and poor management support. And I don't know the details of the case, but that's what it started as. And I suspect that they went in and asked questions. What have you done in this area? Do you have position descriptions? Do you evolve those position descriptions? How do you monitor the level of work people are doing? And I suspect that they just found that there was systemic problems, like, and I call it workplace design, systemic problems, processes and stuff, which were lacking. But it is a real wake-up call that this sort of potential does exist for all organizations. This started with two people and blew up to be over a $1 million undertaking to address some of the side effects. Now, if they had started that journey a year and a half, 2 years ago, they probably would have only had to pay about 100 grand, I reckon, to make some really significant progress, show they take this stuff seriously, and to make a big difference. So yeah, one case doesn't make a whole, economy and all that sort of thing, but it certainly is quite significant in terms of that the enforceable undertaking of $1 million plus.
And Graham, if I could just add, it doesn't need to be communicating with a business overseas. Like when we think about particular job roles that we know have that inherent risk on a regular basis, you think about finance, where it's end of financial year or end of month. If it's retail, it's usually in peak sales periods. So every business has its own rhythm, and that's where it's really important to understand your particular needs.
Very much so. And there's no silver bullet, but safe work talk about a four-step process, and there's other ones around. I'm not saying this is the right one, but it does make sense that you assess the risks, and that can be done through surveys, it can be done through focus groups, it can be done through looking at your stats, absenteeism, turnover, all that sort of thing. You decide on a risk or a couple of risks you want to take forward, you review how you're going, and then you revisit it, you check in again and move forward. I just want to make the point here, some people may or may not this, but they talk about hazards and risks. And hazards are potential problems, and there's 14 of them. But risks is when the intensity or the frequency of that hazard then causes harmful work stress. that's when it becomes a risk. And so I believe it's, I've worked in culture change for a long time, and there's no way you can focus on 14 things. You really want to, in most situations, bring it down to one, two, or three things that you want to focus on for 90 days and see if you can move the needle. Any comment on that?
Yeah, Graham, I'll add to that. So just in my observations, particularly when I'm running focus groups, one of the key things that we do is we have a look at patterns. So there might be 12 hazards reported, but if 2 areas were addressed, it can knock out about 8, or at least reasonably reduce the likelihood of harm across at least 8 of those particular hazards that were identified. So it's not like each and every one needs its own system. You'll find that one connects with the other, and that's what they say.
Of course, yeah.
Psychosocial risks do interact and combine, and that's the key that sets it apart from how we investigate physical safety. It's linear,
Yeah.
whereas with psychosocial risk, I don't want people to feel overwhelmed that are attending, because you'll find that if you address, to Graham's point, 1, 2, 3, or 4 areas, you will naturally start to address. It'll just get picked up because they all combine.
Yeah,
But
of course.
yeah, my main piece of advice here would be it starts with work design. We've got to stop fixing the people and start fixing the work.
So we're now moving on to the Q&A, and as I said, we had lots and lots of questions asked. Thank you very much. That was incredibly helpful. Let me just find questions. So question number 1, which I thought was a good one to start on: what is your number 1 tip to encourage leaders to understand the importance of psychosocial risk? So maybe start with you, Nick. What's your number 1 tip?
Yeah, look, I think, this, as I said before, the hardest thing with psychosocial risks are you can't see them. So I think you've got to really think broadly about, it's not like we can say, got to move something so that someone won't trip over it, or manual handling or lifting. It's got to be something that we're realizing that someone's not coping. So the number 1 tip, I think, is being more human about what you do and how you are as a manager, rather than going back to the achievables. Also look at checking in with those people who are the direct reports, and training them and letting them know that, hey, there are these tools here, not just once there is an issue, pass it back to HR. So look for those early warning signs as well, I suppose, is one of the key things there. Train and look for early warning signs. And if there is someone who's burnt out, as Graham said, doing a large amount of absenteeism, not really saying directly help, but there's some early warning signs. You should be looking at that and saying, almost using that, are you okay? Or is there something we can do for you here?
Keith?
I think Nick's hit it on the head there in terms of that being human as a starting point. I think for anyone in a senior leadership role, the common focus for me quite often is, are you actually having conversations with people within your business? Are you finding out from them whether they really are enjoying their work, or what is it about work that's meaningful to them, and how can you help give them more of that? Are there tasks that are detracting or taking them away from the things they enjoy? How can you redesign? So it doesn't have to be overly scientific. Quite often the really beneficial conversations are the one that you have as a free-flowing dialogue with an individual, allowing them to contribute and to feel empowered. And that then leads back into that concept of being safe enough to give their honest opinion, which quite often can help to move things. And then if you're a leader that has multiple layers between you and the front line, I guess the measure is, how well do your line reports know their people? Do you actually see them role modeling that conversation where they know that someone has a school function coming up, as an example, and they are allowing them to take some time away to go and be a parent, be active in other parts of their life in order to be their whole self?
Yeah, it's a very it sounds simple, but it also is quite profound. I interviewed yesterday on the Caring CEO, Richard Buller. He's the Chief Purpose Officer of KPMG, has an incredible incredible history in terms of human rights, amazing. But I asked him, what does care in the workplace mean to you? And he said, realize that you're working with humans. Humans have basic needs to feel like they belong, to feel like, those around us will have each other's back, that we can have jokes and enjoy ourselves. And I really think that just remembering that and showing that sense of care makes a big difference. Anna?
Me and my predictable, pragmatic style. Please give your leaders the information about what is required in this space. Again, boards and executives are still just finding out about this stuff, let alone, having competent and capable managers. A manager will be competent and capable if they're given the right resources and environment and permission to learn them and then apply these. Because I've got a saying is that policy has killed care in workplaces. Everyone is just fearful. So if you want your managers to do this, firstly, allow it within their role, which means, do they have time to be able to do this? A lot of one-on-ones are the first meeting that a manager cancels, whereas it should be the last meeting that they cancel.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, please don't expect your managers to progress in any shape, way, or form without creating the environment, getting the appropriate education in there, and giving them supportive systems. But also understand that this is a multidisciplinary approach. This particular onus does not just rest with HR or safety. It rests with the directors who own the risk. It rests with legal and governance. It rests with OH&S. It rests with HR, and it rests with management, and it rests with frontline. So there's no possible way, and I've seen it happen in organizations where they're like, oh, great, this isn't a HR issue, this is a safety issue now. And the poor safety guys are then burnt out and experiencing what I call the classic HR bottleneck. So everyone gets involved. That way we will be able to not put too much pressure on managers to operate sustainably in this space. But summing up, please let them know what this is and give them the skills to have a conversation, because they're not just going to be able to do it.
Right. Another one here, which I think is good, based on your observations and experience, what are the top psychosocial risks being identified around Australia that the regulators are looking at? It's always Pareto principle, it always applies. And I was just interested in, I guess, maybe if you just nominate each, because we're running out of time, but if you nominate each, just 2 or 3 of what you think have most significant risks, that would be great. So starting with you, Anna?
Bullying and harassment.
Keith?
I would say job overload.
And Nick?
Risk of going last is both yours are taken, but I think it's a combination of that. It's just, the stress levels, and it can be a combination of those.
Yeah, I was going to click into Nick too.
I've seen some really, recent research from Gallup around engagement, and one of the biggest things people are struggling with is clarity of role, and that just creates lots of confusion, lots of ambiguity. So that's a big thing. Now, interestingly, when COVID started, 55% said that there was clear guidelines on how the company was going to respond to this. So lots of discussion. This year, that's fallen down to 22%. 22% say they get clear guidelines on what the priorities are. So that's a big one. And also, overwork is a really big one. Unfortunately, we're finishing at 1:40, so we'll just have one more question. And I might just ask Nick, being the lawyer here, what are Nick's top tips for how to approach a psychosocial incident investigation?
Well, one of the first ones is determine how serious the matter is and whether you should conduct the investigation internally or externally. That's the really first thing. How capable are your HR team? Is it something that you really should be looking externally for? And I know that's an additional cost, but when you go externally, then think of things like legal professional privilege. That's really important in these things. You may want the report governed by legal professional privilege. So engaging a lawyer, additional expense, but it does really help you in that regard. And then I'd always, and I think HR do this very well, people and culture do it very well, and that is treat every complaint seriously. Even if people say the old adage, I don't want to make a formal complaint, when in doubt, overdo it rather than underdo it.
And Nick, you were saying at the start about assessing how serious it is.
Yeah.
What are some questions that you ask to determine that?
Well, obviously, again, because it's one of those issues you can't actually assess yourself. None of us are medically qualified as a part of the panel. You need to then go and potentially get an IME to see whether there is something that's quite significant here, as well as treating any medical evidence certificates you get with the seriousness it needs. It more becomes a serious issue, Graham, if it's left undone. So I think acting quickly and, if need be, minimising the initial risks. So the initial risk is a person, like Anna said, a bullying type matter, then keep the people apart. Have a temporary measure where maybe someone can work from home until such time as the investigation is completed. But having, as I said, those tools at hand really make that, and then the initial response to it is really, really important.
Right. I want to, because we're approaching the end, but I just want to reflect on something there. And this is something we found in Are You OK? And it happens many, many times. Most people want to do the right thing, but they don't know why and they don't know how and don't know what sometimes. So it can be all three. And so I think there is a really great role for training and how that's done. And with the WeCare 365 team have developed a program for this where there's training for middle frontline managers in a jargon-free and simple way about what the 14 hazards are or 14 risks can be. And it can be customized so that you can just have your first three highest risks first. And we've developed this in consultation with our clients and with insurers, and Anna, Nick, and Keith all gave us feedback in that as well. So if people are interested in experiencing a sample of this and how it operates, we'll send that out as part of the post follow-up, where we'll also share the recording and what have you. So, main takeaways. A 2-minute wrap. Maybe if you start, Keith, and Anna, and Nick.
Thank you. I think what I took away from Anna definitely was the idea that we have the skills, but we need to start with transparent information flowing up to our executive team and providing permission down for our line managers to actually have the time to be human and to spend that time with the people that report into them. I think Nick definitely talked to the value of making sure that we are assessing, and definitely when we looked at that case study, the potential cost that's there when you have to navigate that. So we need to start as employers in dealing with this now, because the obligation is here today. And I hope that's a good summary of my other panelists' contribution.
Nick?
Yeah, thanks, Graham. I think getting from what both Anna and Keith have said, key takeaways: be proactive rather than reactive. And I think that's really important. People say, oh, look, I won't go to HR people or specialists in this area unless we've got a problem or a lawyer. I think that's naive, and I think you do definitely have to be reactive. I think it's a really good proactive. I think it's really important to wake up call the case.
Great.
Yeah, my main takeaway, particularly to make everyone's lives easier that are attending this webinar, is get your board on board. Okay, so it's very, very hard to work upways rather than downways. And I see safety and HR bash their heads against brick walls because they can't get approval, because the board and the risk owners or the positive duty officers of that organization don't understand the concept. So that is the really good place to start, is get your board on board. And there are so many people out there that can help you do that. I can help you do that. I can help you build a case study, but because a lot of people get scared about getting the board on board, but they have to know what's happening. They have to know about the fines. They have to know about the positives. They have to know about their obligations, because at the end of the day, consequences in this particular legislative amendment falls squarely on individual directors of that organization. So the last people to know are actually the ones that own the risk, and that just seems very backward to me. So get your board on board, and the rest of your passion and commitment to making this work will be much easier.
And I guess my reflection is that I think we really need to revisit, the whole communication strategy. As we said before, managers don't know what psychosocial risk is. It sounds complicated. I think it's important to talk about simple things, harmful work stress, and taking relevant action to address that. I really love that saying is the biggest resource is people that want to make a difference. And most managers, I can tell you, want to make a difference, but they don't know how. And looking at creative ways to do that, looking at e-learning to scale it, can make a real difference. Thank you so much to, in the order here up and down my screen, Anna and Nick and Keith. Really appreciate your contribution. As I said, we're going to be recording this and sending it out to others in case others, there were a lot of people that couldn't make it who wanted to. And thank you for being on the journey to make workplaces more caring, but also more successful.
My pleasure. Thanks, Graham. Thanks, everyone.